everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I'm your host, and we've got exams in urban planning, geography, or public policy. This one is absolutely for you. We are going to break down the analytical framework of satellite cities. We'll be looking at the core theory, the big aspirational projects, the sometimes harsh ground realities, and finally the blueprints for a truly sustainable future.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to start by pinning down what a satellite city actually is, then we'll jump into Assam's green township vision, unpack the realities of tech gentrification in Hyderabad, talk about this thing called the dormitory town syndrome, and finally, wrap it all up with some real sustainable solutions for tomorrow.
All right, Section 1, defining the satellite city, separating the actual concept from just, regular urban sprawl.
This is the foundational theory you absolutely need to grasp if you want to accurately analyze how our metropolises are evolving. So, what exactly is a satellite city? You hear this term tossed around all the time, right? Usually people just swap it out for suburb or commuter town, but analytically, geographically, they are entirely different beasts. We're talking about targeted communities, usually anywhere from 50,000 to 300,000 people, situated near a major metro, but functioning in a totally distinct way.
If you're taking notes for an exam, trust me, you're going to want to remember this distinction. Think of a suburb as basically just residential overflow. It's the literal product of unchecked urban sprawl. Suburbs completely rely on the main parent city for jobs, high-end amenities, the whole shebang. But a satellite city, that is a completely independent ecosystem. It has its own self-sustaining local government, a robust standalone employment base, and it's usually cut off from the main city by a physical geographical barrier, like a river, a forest, or a designated greenbelt. It's a partner city, guys, not a dependent. So, formally speaking, a satellite city is a self-contained, medium-sized metropolitan area located near a major city, but crucially, it possesses its own distinct culture, history, and economic infrastructure. And why do we even build them? Well, it's absolutely crucial for balancing population and resources. They are explicitly designed to take the pressure off those overflowing primary urban centers and actually mitigate all that chaotic urban sprawl by offering an alternative for living and working.
And honestly, nothing illustrates this better than Navi Mumbai. Originally designed as a totally self-sufficient urban node to decongest the main island of Mumbai, it actually holds the title of the world's largest planned township. I mean, it's got its own massive port, handling over 65% of India's container traffic, an upcoming international airport, major software parks. It acts as a powerful, independent countermagnet. It pulls people in economic activity toward itself, rather than just funneling a million commuters back into Mumbai every single morning.
Moving on to Section 2, Assam's green township vision, which is honestly a masterclass in aspirational urban planning.
All right, so now that we've got the theory down, let's look at a super ambitious real-world case study. The Assam government is placing a massive $1 billion bet on creating a brand new urban ecosystem to decentralize growth away from Guwahati. And what's really fascinating here is their partnership with Singapore's Surbana Jurong to draft the master plan. They're tapping directly into Singapore's world-class expertise in self-sufficient, eco-friendly development. We're looking at massive, highly funded projects. Take Joggi Road, which has a 1,000 crore rupee Asian Development Bank fund and sits right near a huge new Tata semiconductor plant. Then you've got Palasabari, 1,500 acres purely dedicated to deep tech, startups, and luxury MICE infrastructure, which, quick reminder, stands for meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. Now, I want you to mentally highlight this specific number, 40%. The Joggi Road Township is deliberately carving out exactly 40% of its area specifically for industrial space, but pairing it with an absolute mandate for 20% open green space. This isn't just contractors throwing up endless concrete blocks. It's a very deliberate balancing act between aggressive economic growth and environmental preservation. They're integrating healthcare, schools, even a luxury Taj hotel for all the incoming professionals. The ultimate goal? A fully integrated live-work-play environment.
Okay, Section 3, Hyderabad's tech gentrification reality, the socioeconomic cost of rapid expansion.
So what happens when the economic engine just completely outpaces social planning and inclusivity? Let's take a hard look at High Tech City and the Cyberabad area in Hyderabad. Now, this project successfully branded the region as a world-class IT destination, totally transforming the local economy. But as analysts, we have to ask the critical questions. Was High Tech City purely an economic boom, or did it actually act as the catalyst for a severe urban divide?
Now, what's really interesting about the data here is this stark structural contrast. On one side, you have this incredible lifestyle built for the new tech elite. To attract massive multinational tech firms, the government offered deep financial incentives, like land for jobs policies, and they even voided standard zoning regulations. And yeah, that brought glitzy skyscrapers, luxury gated condos, and premium uninterrupted utilities. But look at the other side. The systemic realities for the local population tell a very different story. A lot of this land was acquired using frameworks like the Urban Land Ceiling Act, which effectively displeased the original agricultural communities. And as those high-tech salaries drove up the overall cost of living, we saw a rapid proliferation of peripheral slums where the working-class service economy was essentially forced to relocate.
So why does this matter to you as a student of policy, or just as a citizen? Well, high-tech city is a textbook warning. When you inject a massive influx of global capital into an area without inclusive long-term social safeguards, you risk rigid socioeconomic segregation. The divide between the highly paid tech elite and the working-class service economy becomes literally entrenched in the city's structure. Even when affordable housing units are planned, they often fail because they relocate marginalized populations to the extreme edges of the city, totally cutting them off from their communities and their livelihoods.
Which brings us to Section 4, the dormitory town syndrome. Basically, what happens when urban planning totally loses its purpose. So let's examine the overarching systemic flaws we keep seeing in poorly executed expansions across the country. If a satellite town is built without an independent economic and social base, it devolves into what planners call a dormitory town. You'll also hear researchers call it phantom urbanization. It's basically this huge imbalance caused by excessive concretization. Developers build these massive residential colonies, but they totally fail to integrate essential social infrastructure. No schools, no healthcare facilities, no commercial centers. Just building affordable housing is not enough on its own. Without mixed-use zoning, these areas are literally empty ghost towns during the day. Everyone is forced to commute back into the main city for everything, which creates massive gridlock traffic bottlenecks. Kind of like what we've seen in parts of Chennai. Yeah, a singular focus on just churning out housing blocks is a literal blueprint for failure. Planners often rely way too heavily on top-down projections instead of actually looking at ground-level data on migration patterns, income levels, or community priorities. And this total disconnect leads right to that ghost city syndrome. Fun fact, this is exactly why so many national metro rail projects severely underperform, often hitting 30 to 40% below their forecasted ridership. They just don't have the complementary feeder networks or the localized economic pull to make the transit system viable.
I really want you to absorb this quote from Primus Partners. Cities cannot and should not emerge overnight. They must be carefully nurtured, tested, and expanded in phases, with governance systems that ensure accountability. The big takeaway here? Sustainable urban development is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. We literally cannot just drop massive concrete grids onto a map and expect a thriving, equitable community to magically spring to life. All right, let's shift gears to Section 5, Sustainable Solutions for Tomorrow, the blueprint for our next generation of cities. Let's bring the energy back up because if you are structuring a competitive exam answer on urban solutions, you absolutely have to nail these next strategies. Solving the dormitory town crisis really comes down to three main pillars. Number one, implement transit-oriented development, or TOD. That means concentrating urban density right around viable public transit hubs to squash sprawl. Korea in Brazil or Singapore are brilliant examples of this. Number two, enforce mixed-use zoning. We have got to blend residential, commercial, and institutional spaces to create these walkable 15-minute neighborhoods where owning a car isn't a strict necessity. And number three, integrate blue-green infrastructure. This means baking ecological sustainability into the design from day one, mandating things like rainwater harvesting, green building codes, and riverfront rejuvenation. Pretty much exactly what we're seeing in the blueprints for Assam's new townships. Executing all of this, of course, requires leveraging advanced geospatial data and multi-dimensional indicators. Modern urban planning is not just sketching lines on a paper map anymore. It's a highly complex, data-driven approach designed to balance economic growth, environmental sustainability, and, crucially, social inclusivity. Community participation has to be baked into these data models from the very beginning to ensure the city actually serves all its residents. And that's how you prevent the kind of exclusionary gentrification and displacement we analyzed earlier. So we've